And the Latina. Yes. In terms of the step practice paper from the Philippine side, as you know that Jay Patumbaka, one of our DILA governing board member, is not able to be with us. But since he gave us his paper and PowerPoint presentation largely in time, so that I asked our colleague Rower to touch upon the brief about the state practice on behalf of the J. So he needed a little bit time, so that the week first, so that I'd like to invite the economicers to have a presentation in terms of the Japanese state practice the last year. So now we have 20 minutes.
Android. Your notebook. Turn around. Cartoon.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak about Japanese state practice in the year of 2017. I'll focus just two kinds of important practice last year. One is legislation related to international terrorism prevention, and the others are judgments to Fukushima nuclear power plant's accident. First, I would like to speak about the amended act on punishment of organized crimes and control of crime proceeds. This is also referred as act on punishment of the preparation of acts, terrorism, and other organized crimes. This act passed diet on 15th June 2017 and entered into force on 11th July. This legislation for implementing UNPOC, the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, which 187 countries and regions are already state parties to, as a useful tool to combat organized crime and terrorism. But at that time, there remain only 11 member states of the United Nations, including Japan, which were not yet state parties to the convention at the time. Following the entry into force of this amended act, Japan deposited its instrument of acceptance, and on 11th July, and finally became a state party to the convention. Why did it take so long to be ratified? Because Japan signed the convention in 2003, it's quite long. It's not quite, but long, still long. Since the criminal law, Japan is based on the principle that the crime should be carried out. This is the most important part of this to understand why Japan cannot ratify this convention. In order to punish at the stage of planning the execution of organized crime, it is necessary to establish domestic law at first. However, the Diet scrapped a bill three times, because the broad definition of conspiracy there had been a criticism. It could become a so-called surveillance society. Same concerns were shown by the Special Rapporteur of the Union Human Rights Council. The new bill requires not only planning to conduct activities listed, but also taking preparatory actions to trigger investigations. Nevertheless, he said, there is no sufficient clarification on the specific definition between plans and preparatory actions. It is too late to clarify the scope of the conduct. And Japanese government responded as follows. The term planning means a concrete, realistic agreement, and the term act of preparation means an act which is carried out based on the planning and manifestation towards commissioning of the planning. These meanings Japan thinks are very clear. So this is a response to the Special Rapporteur. And also, still the concerns further. In order to establish the existence of the extent of such a planning and preparatory actions, he thinks it is logical to assume those churches would have to be subjected to need a considerable level of surveillance. That's why he thinks that Japan needs a kind of safeguards and remedies in existing Japanese law system. And Japan responded again. Under the Japanese Code of Criminal Procedure, investigations are carried out only where there is evidentially supported. Therefore, where there is three necessary conditions should be met. One is involvement of an organized criminal group, and the existence of an act of planning, and the existence of an act of preparation for conditions for this crime. Therefore, the Amendment Act by no means allows state authorities to conduct surveillance against certain groups before any suspicion is acknowledged. Therefore, Japan thinks no need to introduce additional safeguards or remedies, as Special Rapporteur suggested. Further concerns about observations such as GPS detection or monitoring. There are concerns that law enforcement interfere with the right to privacy through methods not necessarily needed in a democratic society. Police might request surveillance measures in order to carry out observations such as GPS detection or monitoring of activities on electronic devices. And Japan responded, under the Code of Criminal Procedure, warrants issued by a judge are mandatory. So, with regard to wiretapping, to intercept telephone conversations and emails. Stringent conditions must be fulfilled for judges to issue warrants. And crimes for which wiretapping is allowed is strictly prescribed by law. The offense of the preparation of act of terrorism and other organized crimes will not be included in such strict list. For example, is a list of such allowed crimes: drugs, firearms, groups storage, organized murder, organized explosive. In addition to such a crime, in 2016, 2016, through the criminal reform we got, and the murder, injury, arson, kidnapping, fraud, so on are included. So, but still very restricted. And finally, Dr. mentioned about the compatibility of the Act with international human rights norms and standards. Article 19 of the Constitution of Japan stipulates that freedom of thought and conscience shall not be violated. Also, the right to privacy is enshrined in Article 17 of the International ICCPR and is also recognized as right derived from Article 13 of the Convention. So Japan thinks it's no problem to it's compatible with the international human rights norms and standards, but still I'll explain as follows. For example, it's okay, just maybe too much. And then this convention is entering into force for Japan on August 10 last year. Here is a list of conventions, UNTOC, and protocol, and also a protocol to prevent human trafficking, protocol against the smuggling of migrants, UN Convention against corruption. These are all entered into force for Japan last year. And I move on to Fukushima things. Again, just for your information, we have a very huge earthquake, March 11, 2011. And it was 9.0 magnitude and triggering a very huge tsunami, which destroyed northeast coast and led to the loss of 90,000 lives. And now 7 years passed. And what is the present situation? Now government tried to decommission Fukushima reactors, but I feel that progress is very slow. Sorry, I forgot. Yeah, this is contaminated water storage tanks. This storage is just accept, receive water, coming from underwater as input, and just store the contaminated water. But there is no exit for the contaminated at this moment. So this is at this moment it's 850 such storage tanks is now built. And today, I want to describe one of the serious issues. 80% of voluntary Fukushima nuclear disaster evacuees now living in other areas of Japan has no intention of returning. This is very sad, but very understandable, but very sad. But prefecture ended housing subsidy for voluntary evacuees at the end of March 2017, stating that living environment in Fukushima prefecture is in good order due to ongoing decontamination work and other factors. So they cannot get money anymore. This is a problem. Voluntary evacuees still worry about the radiation, and many of them have shifted the foundations of their lives already to the place they have evacuated to. Then, what they can do is, 2017, last year, this is the beginning. Voluntary evacuees win compensation over Fukushima nuclear disaster. I just want to mention one recent, not the most recent, one case in 2017. Fukushima District Court, October 10. In this case, this is the first time this case covered those who lived outside evacuation zones. This is a very big decision because it means that decision recognizes the right of the voluntary evacuees and some of in neighboring prefectures with compensations. But despite the amount evacuees still exist, the amount to be paid to those living in the evacuation zones was set at a minimum of 85 million yen, but the amount awarded to the voluntary evacuees was set at just 80,000 yen in principle. So big differences exist. Because of this, the plaintiff in the Fukushima case claimed that they share the same worries having been exposed to radiation. Therefore, they think without claiming individual compensation, the group decided to file a suit for 50,000 yen per month. This is their strategy. In this case, government's responsibility for inaction was also admitted. Concerning the government involvement in the accident, the court decision cited 2002 long-term assessment and concluded by the government headquarters for earthquake research promotion, which predicted that a tsunami caused by a magnitude 8 or higher earthquake was possible among the cause of Fukushima prefecture. But government could, therefore, the government could have predicted that this is like a number, but 15.7 meter tsunami could hit the power plant. Therefore, the government in action to order the utility to prepare tsunami countermeasures by the end of 2002 was significantly lacking in nationality. Well, here there's other related judgment in 2017. Chiba District Court and the Maebashi District Court issued the judgment. Little bit it's differences there, but I don't want to into in detail, but one thing I have to point out is here. This is the last part. Except one case, government is to be held responsible. This is a very big for the Japanese court decision because in Japan it is very difficult to say that, this is government's responsibility. So and if they so, the government will have to pay a lot. So it's very difficult. But here in a Fukushima case, except for just one case, the government is to be held responsible. And another tendency, because I have to say it's a tendency because still we have to wait 20 more than 20 cases now is pending. So I have to wait the 20 cases end, and then I can say final analyze. But there is also tendency for relief on voluntary evacuees damage. First judgment, like Maebashi, just try to pay damages for evacuees from designated areas. But nowadays, it's court try to pay for damages to also to the evacuees from the area. So that's a very good move. And I hope this year, 2018, we should have several judgment coming out. So I hope that all should focus on relief on victims of Fukushima nuclear plant accident. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much. It's very interesting developments the economy shows what happened in Japan. And I'd like to invite the next speaker, the Latsuna. We should have Indonesian practice. You have a very specific topic to talk. Right? They say very specific topics to talk.
Yeah.
You have a 20 minutes.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much, Professor Lee, for this opportunity. So it was a very last minute. I was told to have a present Indonesia. Then I don't want to disappoint anybody. So yes. So I'm trying my best to compile the development concerning international law that happens in Indonesia recently. So I would like to divide my presentation into two segments actually. The first is my own presentation about democracy and how democracy can help us in combating corruption. Because I do believe that corruption is one of the main problems in Indonesia, and that's the reason why so many our international human rights obligations cannot be enforced completely and perfectly because of the problem of corruption. So when we are talking about corruption in Indonesia, then we have plenty of cases, too many stories to tell, from the simplest form of corruption until the most advanced form of corruption. As we know, the recent case of corruption in Indonesia is about the electronic identity card case, and it's full of drama. Really, it's full of drama, and I think that the perpetrator, people suspected that he's the house speaker, but he insisted that he didn't do it. But all of the evidence straight up to him. So that's the best part of the drama. I will tell you about that later. But I would like to highlight upon the emerging power of civil society to prevent and combat corruption, because that is also being mandated by the UNCAC. So when Indonesia ratified UNCAC, as a citizen, I feel very happy, because finally we have this umbrella international convention to protect us from corruption. So the challenge is how to make international obligation can become a reality and give benefits to every citizen in Indonesia with regard to anti-corruption. This brings us to next. This brings us to the analysis, and I would like to explain that there are many international and regional conventions with regard to anti-corruption. And many of those instruments are like reiterating the same spirit and the same rules with regard to anti-corruption. Like, for example, UNCAC obliged Indonesian government to establish an independent anti-corruption body, which we do not have that before. So that's one of the mandates. And also, the most important mandate is to empowering the society to be able to report the case of corruption. As we know, corruption is a very secretive crime. So in many cases, only people inside the government can really know what is going on. And it will be so hard if we do not provide enough protection for the reporting persons. So that's one of the key in the protection of whistleblowers and reporting persons, that includes the empowering of civil society to report corruption indications. So on national level, Indonesia has tried to comply with its obligation by establishing many national laws with regard to anti-corruption. The law number 31 of 1919, and also the law number 20 of 2001, and more specific, it's the governmental regulation concerning the participation of civil society, number 71 of 2000. With regard to this governmental regulation, the government will give reward, like 10% from the convicted amount of corrupted money for the people who report it. That's huge. If the money is $1 billion, that's very huge. But the problem is, when I presented this paper in 2015, there was a representative from the Corruption Eradication Commission, and he said that there has never been a case of people got this reward because he reports it. That becomes a problem that needs to be analyzed. Like what's wrong with the dissemination of this law to the society. I wonder whether our government has given enough effort to make the society know that, hey, there is this kind of law. So if you report something, then you will get 10%. That would be great. It's also good for combating corruption. So I would like to analyze further on how we have the potential for great anti-corruption effort from the civil society. Because as we know, Indonesian society right now, we have much more freedom compared to the era of Orde Baru or the Suharto era, if ladies and gentlemen has heard about that. There is a huge difference between the post-Reformation era and before the Reformation. The flourish of civil rights, and then people have more courage to criticize the government and so on and so forth. I think this emerging situation can be used for better good. That is to provide more oversight to government activity with regard to corruption. And also some theoretical foundation concerning why corruption happens is sometimes because of the weak deliberative democracy, on how weak principal agent and relationship is the cause of corruption, that people cannot really control the government after they got elected. It's like after they got elected, then they said bye-bye, no longer my business, things like that. But corruption has significant impact to human rights, in my opinion. Take, for example, Indonesia just established the universal healthcare in 2014. And if we really analyze when there's a corruption case happen in the universal healthcare, then it's going to directly impact the realization of the right to health. The same regard also with the effort from the Ministry of Education to give many scholarships for Indonesian students in rural area. If corruption happens in that scholarship mechanism, then it can be a direct threat towards the realization of the right to education. So I believe that international law should have protected us as a citizen in the realest form to protect us from corruption with regard to the ratification of UNCAC. And then come to the conclusion upon how I believe that ratification of an international convention is a halfway towards the full realization of what the convention demands. The other way is the need for the government to really implement this through the national legislation, through the education towards the citizens that to have this international law to also protect you hand in hand with our national law that we have created to enforce this international law. So I think that's the conclusion upon how civil society in Indonesia will have a big power to prevent and combat corruption, given enough education from the government that there's a ratification of UNCAC and also there's many laws that we have created to implement the mandate of the convention. That's the general, that's the specific presentation with regard to corruption. And then I would, how many times? I still have times. Yeah, how many minutes? Yeah, sorry, minutes. 3 minutes, okay. I would like to highlight some good development. Thank you very much. This soft guy, yeah, I lost track of time. But that's the development with regard to maritime security in Indonesia. That's the case that ladies and gentlemen would like to hear. So our government take strongest action in order to implement our sovereignty towards our territorial sea and economic zones. As we have known, Indonesia has already sunk about 300 illegal fishers, some of them from China, yes. So that's one of the development in Indonesia, because before Mr. Jokowi, the enforcement was not that harsh. After Mr. Jokowi is in the position as the president, he mandates that we need to strengthen our sovereignty in the sea. That comes with the sinking of ships and so on and so forth. With regard to Rohingya, Indonesia is always taking bold action to mediate the problem between Myanmar and also Bangladesh. I think that's all. I'm sorry I'm taking so much time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Actually, the Laksana is working at the University of Atmajaya, right, here in Jogja. It's a Catholic university, right? And actually, she would be very familiar to the participant here because her article on climate change will appear this coming June in the Journal of International Comparative Law published by the Breer. So that's very nice to see that actual research from the Indonesia on the scene. So next speaker is the lawyer. He's not the J, as we know. And J. Lakumbakar is he recently took a job as a vice dean at the University Law School and the two directorship of the center that we belonging to, so that he's not able to join us today. But he has sent his manuscript largely in advance so that the lawyer will brief what he wrote. So anything wrong is Jay's fault, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So that thank you very much for to very kindly accept my invitation to speak on your book.
Again, pleasant good morning to everyone. Philippine State Practice in International Law. So Jay and I are very good friends. In fact, when I was doing my master's in Canada at Dalhousie, he was doing his JSD, and I've worked with him when I was still a student. And in fact, I met him a couple of days ago. He's a very busy guy, as Professor Sokuli mentioned. So today we'll be looking at Philippine State Practice in International Law. And in Jay's presentation, he actually identified 6 cases decided by the Supreme Court. An international case, the arbitration case, which he discussed very briefly, and 3 concurrences in the Philippine Senate to 3 conventions. So let's look at some of these cases. Again, I have a note from Jay to say that he apologizes for not being able to go here, and he has prepared an article which is submitted and a PowerPoint which I'm reading on his behalf. So the first case here is Air Canada and Commissioner of Internal Revenue, which was decided in January 21st, 2016. Air Canada, as we all know, is an offline air carrier. It sells tickets in the Philippines through a company called Aerotel. And what happened in this case is that they paid income taxes from the 3rd quarter of 2000 to 2002. And it was paid to our Commissioner of Internal Revenue. And the Commissioner based its assessment on our internal national revenue code, which imposed a 2.5 income tax and a 32% income tax from foreign corporations engaged in business in the Philippines. What Air Canada did was to invoke Article 8 of the 1977 Convention between the Philippines and Canada for the avoidance of double taxation and the prevention of fiscal evasion with respect to taxes on the Philippines. So basically, what Air Canada was arguing is that the Philippines, under this treaty, should not impose a tax higher than 1.5% of the gross revenue derived from Philippine sources. Air Canada, however, paid under protest, and it filed a petition for review to the Court of Tax Appeals, asking for a refund of the money that they paid via taxes. The Court of Tax Appeals held that Air Canada was not liable for the taxes, and Air Canada brought a decision to the Supreme Court for review. The Supreme Court, in this case, the Philippine Supreme Court held that Air Canada was not liable for either the 2.5 tax on gross billings or the 32% corporate income tax. The reasoning of the Supreme Court was, since it was an offline carrier, it did not operate flights into and out of the Philippines. The gross billings was actually not applicable because Philippine gross billings, as defined, applies to revenue derived from carriage of goods, excess baggage, cargo, mailing, which applies to a continued and uninterrupted flight, and that did not apply in this case. Also, the court said it would not be liable for corporate income tax, considering that there was this treaty. Remember, there was a treaty that they signed in 1977, Philippine Tax Treaty. It was a valid treaty. It was ratified and effective. So the court said that the tax treaty is an agreement entered into by the Philippines, a sovereign state with Canada. And the purpose of that treaty is to eliminate double taxation, which is actually what happened here. Also, the court took occasion to remind the parties that the Philippine Constitution adopts, and that's the quote on the screen, adopts generally accepted principles of international law as part of the law of the land and pacta sunt servanda as basis for subject of the application of the National Internal Revenue Code. The next case is actually a series of cases. So in 2016, we had at that time our presidential elections, and one of the most famous candidates at that time was a lady named Mary Grace Natividad Poe Lamanzares. That's otherwise known as Grace Poe. So Grace Poe ran for president. He actually lost, but he was very, very popular, and they were actually quite scared of this lady. And this particular lady was actually a foundling. So he was an abandoned child. So he was an abandoned newborn infant left by unknown parents in a church in Iloilo, a province in the Visayas, in 1968. So being a foundling, they were arguing that his citizenship was in question. So they were saying a foundling, which is in this case Ms. Lamanzares, running for election is not qualified because our election laws require, and the Philippine Constitution in fact requires the president to be a natural-born citizen. So there were a series of cases filed in the Commission of Elections disqualifying Ms. Lamanzares on the issue of citizenship. So the issue of citizenship, the Supreme Court ruled that Senator Paul Lamanzares, she was also an incoming senator at that time, is to be considered a natural-born citizen. So they were saying that according to the provisions of Article 15 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and Article 7 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and Article 24 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, deemed this founding to be a natural-born citizen. So the court found that this instrument all obligated the Philippines to grant nationality from birth and ensure that no child is stateless. So further, the court determined that it's a generally accepted principle of international law to presume foundlings as having been born of nationals of the country, in which, so the Supreme Court said the foundlings should be citizens of the country where you find them. So it cited two other provisions, two other conventions, which were not ratified by the Philippines. Article 14 of the 1930 Hague Convention on certain questions relating to conflict of nationality, and Article 2 of the 1961 UN Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness as giving effect to the UNHCR. It also relied on state practice, showing that in at least 60 other countries in Asia, North and South America, and Europe, they all have laws which recognize foundling as their citizens. So the foundlings are supposed to follow the citizenship of the country where you find them. And it's common state practice. The third case is Capital Wireless and Provincial Treasurer of Batangas, decided in 2016. Here, the province of Batangas, a province in the northern island of Luzon, assessed real estate taxes upon Capital Wireless. Because Capital Wireless in this case owned submarine cable, and the submarine cable run under the municipal waters of a municipality belonging to this province. So they levied and auctioned the submarine cables because the company couldn't pay, and in fact they refused to pay the real estate taxes. So the case went to court, to the regional trial court, and finally brought to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said the parties failed to exhaust administrative remedies, but nevertheless it affirmed the decision of the lower court. So they were saying, setting that aside, the lower court declared that submarine wires or cables, which are used for communication, may be taxed like any other real estate. The court also said the submarine cables are like machinery, which are subject to real property tax. And it also said and took notice of the fact that Nasugbu was a coastal municipality, and the sea where these cables lie fall within the 12 nautical miles, of course, territorial sea of the Philippines, which under UNCLOS, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, the Philippines has complete sovereignty, and thus the portion of that submarine cable lies within Philippine territory, and for that, the local authorities would have the capacity to tax them. The next case is Intellectual Property Association of the Philippines versus Executive Secretary Ochoa, and case decided in July 19, 2016. Here, the Intellectual Property Association of the Philippines commenced a special action for certiorari and for prohibition against the validity of the Philippine accession to the Madrid Protocol without the by the Department of Foreign Affairs. The Supreme Court dismissed the action, finding no grave abuse of discretion in light of existing state policies based on legislation on intellectual property. The court also observed that there are no hard and fast rules on the propriety of entering into a treaty or an executive agreement on any given subject as an instrument of international relation. The primary consideration for such a choice appears to be the intent of the parties and the desire to craft their agreement in a way that furthered their respective interests. It also again reiterated that that states are obliged to comply with the principle of pacta sunt servanda. I don't think I need to spend a lot of time on this case. So we all know that in 2016, July 12, the arbitral tribunal on maritime and jurisdictional rights of the Philippines against China in the South China Sea. So maybe just a quick rehash of the main points. The main points being that the arbitral tribunal decided that the 9-9 claim by China does not find basis in the law of the Sea Convention, having been extinguished by the ratification of China to the convention. It also ruled that no features in the area are capable of generating extended maritime zones because they're not island under Article 1213 of the convention. And finally, it also ruled that China has violated provisions on the marine environmental protection for the massive reclamation activities it did on 7 of the islands. So of course, this decision is of course great presidential weight and does not just apply to the Philippines but all of the other claimant states as well. In this case, David and Senate Electoral Tribunal again concerned our friend Senator Lamazar, remember the founding. So now they're saying that she's not qualified to run, remember, as president. Now they were also saying that they wanted to unseat her as senator for not being a natural born citizen, and therefore, so they said she was a citizen of the Philippines, but now they were saying she has to vacate her seat because she's not qualified, not being a natural born citizen under the Constitution, and therefore not being qualified. So since she's a founding, they were saying there's no way to determine the citizenship of her parents. According to the principle of jus sanguinis, she failed to establish Philippine bloodline, quote unquote. So the court dismissed the petition, and it cited, among others, the basic reasoning that foundings are human persons. They have dignity which should be valued, and they should be respected by all civilized nations. So they also cited the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which protects the rights of the child to immediate registration and nationality after birth. They wanted to prevent statelessness, and of course, they wanted to prevent discrimination on account of birth status. The next case, Association of Medical Clinics for Overseas Workers in GCC, was in respect of an order to stop the practice of referral decking. So they wanted the clinics to have a certain number of migrant workers to be looked at, and that has been challenged because it was said that it violated an agreement under the Gulf Cooperative Council of States, which exempted the association from being subject to the administrative control of the Department of Health, Philippine Department of Health. So the court rejected the argument of the association, and it said that on the ground of sovereign equality and independence of states, that they have to be subject under the jurisdiction of the Department of Health, and also recognize the principle of sovereign immunity, which restricted such immunity to acts which Wilson versus Ermita decided in 2016. Here we have a British national who was accused of a crime of rape before the regional trial court. He was subsequently acquitted on appeal because there were discrepancies and inconsistencies with the statements made in the testimony of the victim herself. Pending appeal, he filed a case against the Human Rights Council against the Philippines for violations. He was released from detention. He returned to the UK, and he sought compensation from the Board of Claims of the Department of Justice, which awarded him a certain amount. But however, he wanted to return back to the Philippines, and he was denied a visa to return to the Philippines due to his name being on a watch list for his conviction of a crime. So he again sued the Philippines, and he got a document from the UN Human Rights Committee, a view, quote unquote, and he was saying that because of that, the view of the Human Rights Committee, no action could be taken against him. And so he filed a case for mandamus, and it was brought to the Supreme Court, who denied the petition. The Supreme Court noted the Philippines was a party to the ICCPR. The competence of the UN Human Rights Committee. However, the Supreme Court said that the view was not in the nature of a judicial decision, and therefore they're just recommendatory, and it's for the branches of government to determine whether or not that should be acted upon. Two cases, More Knights of Rizal. This one Nicer result versus DMCI. DMCI is actually a construction property developer. So they got a big contract to build what they call Tower of Manila, 49-story condominium. And this condominium is supposed to be located in one of our historical landmarks, the National Park in Manila, called Rizal Luneta Park. So the petitioners wanted to have that disapproved because it violated the Venice Charter, and the Supreme Court dismissed the petition and said that the Venice Charter is actually not a treaty, but and as such, it's not enforceable as law because the Philippines as a sovereign state has the power to determine what is to the best of its interest and the most effective means to preserve and restore historical monuments, buildings, and sites. Mitsubishi Corporation, simple facts, Mitsubishi, of course, is a Japanese corporation. So in this case, the governments of Japan and the Philippines executed an exchange of notes. Japan gave the Philippines a loan in the amount of 40,400 million Japanese yen through Overseas Economic Cooperation Fund. And this fund is supposed to be to have a coal power thermal plant in the Philippines. So the government on this part said that we will pay all of the taxes, and they did under protest. And later on, they went to court to ask for a refund of the amount of money they paid under taxes. So the Supreme Court here ruled that Mitsubishi was entitled to a refund because the taxes were erroneously paid, because they said that the exchange of notes represents an obligation on the part of the Philippines which it should honor because it's in the nature of an executive agreement which is binding on the state even without Senate concurrence. I'm almost down to the last slide, and this is the last slide. So in 2016, 2017, the Philippines actually ratified or became a party and concurred in 3 agreements. So the first one is one entered in December 5, 2016. The Philippine Senate passed resolution number 33, which concurred with the ratification of the Articles of Agreement of the Asian Infrastructure Investment as an international financial institution. In 14 March 2017, the Philippine Senate issued a resolution which concurred on the ratification of the Paris Agreement. And for 14 August 2017, this is the last one, the Philippines Senate passed Resolution 58, concurring in the ratification of the Convention concerning the protection of the right to organize and procedures for determining conditions of employment in the public service. I still have 2 minutes left, but I thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know both Steve J and Roy very well, but I have to say that your presentation much better than Jay. Thank you. We have sort of time for the Q&A session. Before I open the floor, as a moderator, I'd like to ask a very quick question to the speaker. The first to Karami. You mentioned that the Fukushima Prefecture starts to provide a housing subsidy, right? How much is that the housing subsidy? That's the first question. And then you mentioned only one case is about the government's responsibility for inaction in the nuclear disaster, right? Is there any case related with the government's responsibility for inaction in the case of the natural disaster, not only nuclear disaster or earthquake? So that's one question I have to you. And the question to Ratna is that actually 2015 we hold the DILA conference at the Makassar Hasanuddin University. One of the university professors at Hasanuddin is you may know him, Laude Sharif. Yeah, Laude Sharif. He actually presented exactly same title of presentation today. He's talking about the role of the civil society in terms of the implementation of the UN Convention Against Corruption. Right? CAC. And I know the lawyer they leave more time right now in Australia rather than the Philippines. But as you are the specialist in the law of ocean policy, would you update us the post South China Sea arbitration in Philippines? Because we know that the 2016 there is a significant, very important decision made by the tribunal. But what is the applicant's reaction in terms of implementation or the enforcement? So that I'm very happy to update what is going on inside of the Philippines. Okay. Now I open the floor. I'm going to collect the first round of the questions, then it's back to the speaker. So anyone who wants to raise questions? Yeah, thumbs up.
Thank you for the presentation. There is another institution, right? The corruption. Yes. So their interaction with the civil society, and also actually the ASEAN is the only sub-region in Asia that has the regional human rights institutions. So ICHE and there any interactions on the work for the anti-corruption. These are the questions that I would like to read. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, then give your mic to the speaker to respond one by one, then we give you time to think about from the group.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question. First of all, I have a question from Sobri. How much is subsidy for evacuees from Fukushima prefecture? It is 80,000 per person. And so is just disconnected. So, and the next question is, we have Maebashi. The Maebashi district court decision is the first one to decide the governmental responsibility for Fukushima nuclear plant's accident. And also Fukushima, I'll show you the case. And Kyoto, this is this court case is this year, 2018, and also Tokyo District Court. So we have 4 cases so far to admit the government responsibility. But one of the district court decision, Chiba district court decision doesn't didn't admit governmental responsibility. Chiba district court said it is impossible for the government to foresee such tsunami is coming, and government couldn't do anything for prevention for such damages. So therefore, only one case reject the governmental responsibility.
So question first. Yeah, I know it's about the therapists. I haven't met them. It's a very important message. Yeah, one of the commission of the Corruption Eradication Commission. So with regards to the progressive development concerning the ratification enforcement mechanism for the UNCAC is there's one provision with regard to obstruction of justice. So back then, after the ratification, this provision has never been implemented. But then the case of electronic identity card happened. Bisa tolong ditunjukkan cerita ektp. Also, this case is very big because that includes the house of the speaker, and then the house of the speaker was accused of becoming the intellectual actor for like distributing all of the bribe from the businessmen, and then they are embezzling state funds that should be used for the making of identification card. It's a very huge of money. It's more than $7 billion, I think. Yeah, it's a huge of money, and because this case is very political in nature, there's a lot of drama involved with regard to the process of making this house speaker a suspect. So. Charges in the court for the case of obstruction of justice, because the court thinks that this lawyer has many scenarios in order to get this House of Speakers away from Indonesia or away from the court proceeding. There's a case of manipulated car crash, yeah, and then the case of how this House of Speakers allegedly designed to pretend that he is sick. And then KPK sent a professional doctor from KPK, and then the doctor checked on him, and the doctor said that he is as healthy as 19-year-old. So it's a lot of drama. But I'm very glad the progressive development is KPK brave enough to implement the provision of obstruction of justice to this lawyer. And now this lawyer, we don't have the photo, but the lawyer for the Mr. Speaker, Setia Novanto, is now facing charges. And as usual, a lot of drama inside of the court, like he is angry with KPK and saying that KPK is political and so on and so forth. But with regard to the legal implementation, this is the first case of the provision concerning obstruction of justice be implemented in the Indonesian court. I think that's very progressive. There are more development with regard to UNCAC provisions being implemented like ideally in Indonesian court. And then for Professor Beck, thank you very much. Anti-corruption strategy in Indonesia is facing a lot of political opposition because the transformation of Indonesia into a more democratic country, a more open and transparent country, is sometimes it's not as smooth as it should be. So there's the allegation that many people in the past, they do not really like with the current situation because corruption in Indonesia is like dynasty. Corruption, collusion, and nepotism. It is in a grand corruption scheme, and it is conducted by so many people, so systematic and structured. So sometimes, if we caught on some people, other people will protect them. And the only independent commission is KPK alone. Even back then, there are some cases that police institution is against KPK. It is sad because police institutions should have helped KPK in eradicating corruption. But the case happened because one of the head of the police was accused of corruption. And then the whole police institution, instead of defending KPK, they are defending the suspect. That's pretty weird, right? So that's sometimes very political in nature. And Komnas HAM sometimes they do not have enough power to speak up because based on the institutional design, Komnas HAM is only consultative in nature. So they don't have binding recommendation or can impose punishment. So it seems like they established Komnas HAM for formality. So there's Komnas HAM, we have democratic and so something like that. And with regard to But in legal terms, they are only consultative in nature. So they do research, and if they have something to recommend, then it's just mere recommendation, no sanctions, no deadlines that can be imposed, and so on and so forth. I do really hope that in the future we can have stronger civil society action to push the government to be more transparent and to strengthen the human rights institution to be able to control and provide check and balances to the government. Yeah, please.
It's very interesting. They have the power to publish through the media. So people get to know what really happened. So I think in that sense, maybe there are and publicize some of their non-legally binding recommendations on the corruption issues. Maybe there's some chance to gradual change on some of the issues. So maybe tonight, but I just had some idea that that's why.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will try to write all that as a suggestion for the National Human Rights Commission, because even the representatives from the National Human Rights Commission sometimes complain with regard to the very limited mandate, and this mandate is sometimes doesn't work and it's not strong enough if we are with the task that they are facing to fully protecting human rights in Indonesia. Very good suggestion, thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Soko, for the question. The question that Professor Sokuli asked is, are there any updates on the Philippine post-arbitration strategy? So as you know, in 2013, the Philippines filed unilaterally under Annex 7 of the UN in the South China Sea. So at its inception, China also said that it will not participate, will not honor, it will not implement the award. So it was, of course, we all know in 2016, July 12, the arbitration tribunal gave the award. So from 2012 up to now, I can honestly say that there's not much that's happened. And of course, for me, watching from outside the Philippines and also heavily involved in this area of research, I can only explain it through the factor of one person, and that for me is our President Rodrigo Duterte. So you might be aware in June 30, 2016, 15 days before the key, I would personally fight using my own arms, China, and repel all attack. And then when he became president, lo and behold, it was very, very radically different. In fact, I just came from Manila a few days ago for a South Chinese conference, for a law policy training rather. And some of and this is of course I'm assuming Chatham House rules apply. Even the South China Sea Arbitration Tribunal sometimes is not referred to in official communication. You would know that Philippines has chaired ASEAN in 2017. We lost that opportunity. The communiques never mentioned the Arbitration Tribunal Award and so on. So really, the Philippine president, as a chief architect of foreign policy, has determined on his own that he has decided to almost shelve this award. And in fact, you can see the stark difference, the stark contrast. Before, in the previous administration, they were very negative towards China. Almost there was frozen economic and diplomatic relations. Now the president has actually made 3 state visits to China. They have economic, of course, very strong economic relations, including huge amounts of loan, military loan, and so forth. So really, the post-arbitration scenario on the Philippine side is to ignore the award and just to almost proceed as if no award was made. But if you look at other issues, remaining issues, so you would be mindful that the award does not cover sovereignty. So there's still a lot of more important issues that need to be settled. Sovereignty, the issue of access to fisheries because there's supposed to be fishing rights there, the issue of how to dismantle the massive reclamation work done by China, the issue of reparations for the damage they have done to the environment, and those things also remain. So the bottom line is we won a massive victory, but really I don't know what came of it. So in the end, I think China still emerged as the victor, and I say that with a hint of course frustration and sadness because it was a hard fought legal battle. But then at the end, it's all about geopolitics. It's all about Czech diplomacy. It's all about the whims of this president who has decided he prefers diplomatic economic relations with China rather than pushing for the rule of law and for this award to be implemented.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions to probe? Yes, Fernando.
Okay, to all presenters. First, related to Japan. To what extent the subsidy matter is international matter? If in international trade law, I can understand. But in subsidy related to the housing, that's internal disbursement. So how can it relate to international law? The second one, to I don't know whether it is the same as my feeling or not. That in Indonesia, even though we have ratified, if I'm not mistaken, the conventions on anti-corruption, but the sense of international law in relation to the corruption eradication in Indonesia is not so. It is not a matter of international law, but it is purely national law matter. That's my feeling. And the last one for the Philippines. Is there any difficulties when to prove about the general principles of law in that case? Thank you.
Okay, fair enough. Any other questions that after get the response from the speakers, each individual basis, then we might close the session. So, Economy, go first.
Thank you for your question. I understand that your question is international aspect of this domestic cases. Is it correct? Yeah. Because Japan is a kind of model. It's not a good model, but it's, we suffered a huge accident, nuclear accident. Then we international on the international society, we have a convention on supplementary compensation for nuclear damage. But this convention is just to try to make the companies to pay damages, not for the government. So enough money that victims cannot get any relief. So that's why I think that from now, like maybe Indonesia, Vietnam, and want to have nuclear power plants more than in Japan. And if you have an accident, and what's your country going to do? It's I think Japan would be a kind of model for such a accident in near future. Because I feel the international convention is not enough for for the damages to be paid for the victims.
I think the question is my question from Professor Mandel is similar with the question for Ms. Adami. I'm looking at this matter in a comprehensive manner on how I believe that international law should protect every citizen if we ratify the international law. So the challenge is not just ends after the ratification. Law. So in Indonesia, there's a problem with monism and dualism. Sometimes many Indonesian international scholars get confused whether we are a monist countries or whether we are dualist countries, because most of the scholars claim that we are monist, but in reality, after the ratification, there is a need for another legislative actions in order to make the international conventions be fully implemented to the society. So that's the main reason why a government ratifies something. It's because the government agreed with the law, and the government believes that this law will give much more benefit to the society. And it would be a pity if after the ratification the progress ends. That's my main concern with the ratification of international law in Indonesia. I want it to be completely implemented, not just with regard to anti-corruption, but also with human rights. So, take for example, in Japan's case, I am very amazed on how the court of Japan can, punish the government. It means that there's really a neutrality here on how the judges only see what is fair and what is justice, and does not see whether the plaintiff is government or whether the plaintiff is just a common citizen. I think that's the higher goals of the law, to really protect the society. So I think we just have different perspectives, but for me, it's an international law issue. Thank you.
Yes, what Pananda is asking is, are there difficulties in proving general principles of international as part of the law of the land? So, in the Philippines, under the 1987 Constitution, Article 2 says the Philippines adopts the renunciation of war as national policy, and it accepts general principles of international law as part of the law of the land. Of course, it's a more general statement. So the question of Pandan then is also related to what Ratna was saying about monist dualism. How does international law become part of Philippine law? Of course, what happens is actually when we ratify treaties, the same as most other countries, it needs to have a national procedure, which is, in the case of the Philippines, concurrence by our upper house, the Senate, 2/3 majority. So that's quite easy for treaties of a conventional nature. The expression of state sovereignty expressed through the signing of a treaty has to go through Senate ratification. But for other obligations of a customary nature, obligations which are erga omnes, obligations which are peremptory in character, which are norms applicable to all states, supposedly they're supposed to be part of our law of the land, which means you don't need to incorporate them or have them ratified or enacted in legislation. Of course, that's in principle, but in terms of proving, the rules of court in the Philippines provide that they are supposed to be known to our judges through a process of judicial notice. And of course, again, that's very, very theoretical. It just means that they should be aware that the purpose of law, which applies to everyone, customary nature, erga omnes customary, binding on all states, pactus servanda, and all other of those nature are known to our judges, which of course is not really the case. So as a case in point, you would have seen in the case chosen by Jay, they look at, of course, the ratification, and then they look at state practice, even for conventions which we are not parties to. whether there's enough, of course, you put in your juries and all of these things to prove to the parties that such an obligation exists. Thank you. So.
Thank you very much. By the receiving the answers from the speakers this time, I formally close this session and also close the formal program of this today's conference. And I would like to ask the participants to join me to thanking for the presentation to us. So thank you very much. Without further ado, I invite the command of the chairman of the DILA to be with me and to have the level session. So. No. Can I go first? Because yeah. Thank you very much, the participants, the speakers of today's conference. In particular, I'd like to express my warm thanks to the local hosts, the lecturer Nanda, to lead us today, and for your wonderful hospitality. I know that you come to Korea to stay about how long? About a year? Okay, and so please contact us so that you will be our honored guest. Since Korea participants this time to come from the corner of the Korea, so we will be a chance to show that our country to you. And thank you very much for the sponsors for this conference from the Korean side, the KMI, and also KIOS, and also Korean National Diplomatic Academy, was the general sponsor, so that 11 delegates from Korea to participate this conference. I know that not only the participant, but as you see that there are many staff members to working behind the scene. So on behalf of the North Korea, I would like to show our thanks to them. Can you join me to show that our thanks? And also my colleague Kumar to very kindly make a bridge to work to this you are in Jogja in Indonesia, so that we bring a very good memory and the learning and understanding the Indonesian practice of the international law. So thank you, and hoping that we will see the next year in Indonesia again for 30th anniversary DILA. And hoping that if you come to Korea, please contact us. So you will be our guest. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, I don't know what to say because everything has been said by Sepu. You know, I was going to be here, but very fortunate for me that everything has been moved ahead of time. Because I haven't prepared myself actually, so which is very good. Nonetheless, I was when I look at the agenda and then I have to say something on this issue. I was going to discuss with you on the responsibility to protect by the ASEAN countries against the Myanmarese government, even though it has not been used, the responsibility to protect when you know there is an incident in 2017 where the Rohingyas is being persecuted by the authorities, especially the military forces in Myanmar, and of course ASEAN and Indonesia does not uses the R2P. Because we think that R2P is have not matured in this region, and we would probably these countries would be hesitant to use the R2P like in any other regions. Nonetheless, I have put forward my views on the newspaper on this R2P, hoping that this would, of course, create some pressure, not only for my own government, if I'm being voted by the Jakarta Post, but also by the Myanmar's government, so that they will understand that if there are a gross violation of human rights, then countries, not unilaterally, but through multilateral means, can step in. And we understand that recently the United States, UK, and France is striking against Syria, which people will say that, of course, this needs to be done. Nonetheless, under international law, the question is whether they have the authorities without the mandate from the United Nations. This is, again, an issue which we can further discuss. The other thing that I was going to say is on Ari's presentation, because he's not here. He mentioned about, while Ibu Ratna discussed about how monism, dualism, nonetheless, if you have an international treaties ratified, then the question is whether the treaties, the provision within the treaties, has been transformed to national legislation. I think this is also an important issue, and Indonesia has been lacking on this issue. We have ratified a lot of treaties, but we are very poor in implementing those provisions, the new norms, into our legislation. Now, what I see from Ari, he said that probably we're not going to discuss about signing a treaty and then transform the provision to national legislation, but we can use other means, which is adoption. So if we have a treaty and we said that we do not want to be bound by it, but we think that the provision is good for Indonesia, then we can adopt the provision in the treaty, which we have not ratified, into our national legislation. This is what happened in the refugee issues in Indonesia. Indonesia is not a party to the 1951 Refugee Convention, but in 2016, the government, under a presidential regulation, issued a President Regulation number 126, 2016, which adopt many provision under the provision of the UN Convention. This is something that for me surprises, because I'm not saying that I don't agree that refugees need to be protected, but in Indonesia sometimes they cannot distinguish between quote unquote real refugees and those who said that they are refugees, but instead they wanted to go to Australia and to look for a job, a better life in Australia. And we have this problem. And because United Nations High Commissioner on Refugee is situated, they have a representative office in Jakarta, in Indonesia. So many of these people will come to Indonesia. They come legally, of course, but then once they get to Jakarta, they will go to the UNHCR and then asking them to give them the status of refugee. And now we have problems because the detention house that the immigration officers have cannot accommodate these people. In Jakarta, for example, they will go to mosque and then they will settle in there in the mosque. But actually, they are what I refer to as white-collar refugees, or the refugees that is not real refugees. In any case, Indonesia wanted to respect human rights of these refugees without ratifying the 1951 Convention. So they promulgate the presidential regulation of 126. So this is an interesting issues. I think that should be put, on paper, so that the other part of the world will understand how many countries in Asia cope with issues of international law, especially when the international treaties of law are not made by them, but by the Asians. And then they wanted to ratify this, but they don't have the resources, the manpower, or the funding in order to implement fully the provision. As I mentioned with Ari, we can adopt the provision of the international treaties, but then again, adopting is sometimes also difficult. So in any case, this is some experience that I see in Indonesia. I don't know whether you also have this problem in your jurisdiction. But coming back to the academy, DILA Academy and workshop, in closing, of course, I would like to thank you all for being here, for staying with us. Be patient until 12:49, so we're going to have late lunch. Secondly, I would like to thank Pak Nandang and his team, Dodik and his team, organizing committee, for an excellent job, well done. Also, Chris is very with his able hands, including using computers and everything, which I don't have any knowledge of. I wanted UII to host the DILA Indonesia. So we're going to have Indonesia. Of course, soon after we have information on Indonesia. And then I asked Pak Nandang and Pak Dodik to also establish DILA Indonesia. Of course, not exclusively UII, but other universities in Indonesia who are interested, like DILA Korea, of having DILA in our jurisdiction. So thank you very much, and I hope you will have a nice day in Yogyakarta and enjoy your travel tomorrow. You will be toured around Yogyakarta, and hopefully you will have a nice trip back home. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much to Professor Lee and Professor Hikmanto for formally closing our session for today. Ladies and gentlemen, all participants, with that, we have come to an end of our session for the 2018 DILA International Conference and Academy and Workshop. I'd like to thank my utmost gratitude for our participants for their contribution, and also the committees for helping for the success of this event. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to inform that after this, we will be having lunch. Lunch has been prepared, and also since the session has ended, this afternoon is free for the participants to take their time. The reception and farewell dinner will be conducted at 6 p.m. at the same place where we had our welcoming dinner. Thank you very much. And once again, big round of applause for all us. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Just a short announcement that our dinner will start around at 6:15. So please be ready in the first floor. And the restaurant is different with the breakfast restaurant, but our restaurant for the dinner this night will be in the same restaurant that we have for the first time in the welcoming dinner. And we will give you the certificate of participation, and also we'll give you a little souvenir from the Islamic University of Indonesia, and we will also have some performance music from our students. And we also serve you, we ask the chef, the restaurant for the lunch, rendang. So because most of the participants asked Christopher to provide rendang, so